On this episode of Still Loading, now you're gaming in high fidelity. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, I have two guests for you, and these are guests that one has been on the show before, and we'll go into that in a quick second, but these guests, I have admired their work for a number of years. In fact, when I first was able to get the one of them on he was on the Final Fantasy draft, so you may, by the title, you should already know who these people are. I don't know why I'm bearing the lead. It's in the title of the episode. But we're going to keep pretending that you don't know who they are. So we're going to keep on going. But I've been a fan of their work for a good number of years. And when I was able to get one of them on the Final Fantasy draft, that was just such an amazing thing for me. It's one of those things where it's like you watch someone do their work for so long, you don't think you'd ever actually get to meet them. And then you do, and they end up being great people. And here today with me to talk about how they got into YouTube, how they got into their high fidelity gaming journey are Try and Coury from the My Life in Gaming YouTube channel. Try, Coury, how are you doing today?
Hey, how's it going?
Thank you so much for joining me. I'm very happy to do this, especially a little behind the scenes info on this. This was kind of a last minute recording session, and these guys were gracious enough to set aside some time on a Saturday afternoon to just kind of talk and for us to get to know each other and for you as an audience to get to know them better. So let's dive into this. The first question I wanted to ask you to kind of kick this all off: how did you two first even meet? Because I see, if you look on their YouTube channel, their P.O. boxes are in different states. So I want to know how you guys first got to know each other.
That's a pretty common question. I mean, a lot of people are surprised when they learn that, like, oh, you don't work together like in the same place.
Yeah, I mean, we live about 8 hours apart. You know, Try is like in North Carolina, and I am Northern Kentucky. And we met through a website that Try was a co-creator or co-founder of called The Backloggery, and he's like a staff member. And we were both participating on the site, I guess, and we both went to MagFest one year, and that was the first time we met in person. And we both had similar backgrounds in video, and we became fast friends from that. And then we spent a long time trying to figure out how to like record good game footage with like really no ambitions, I think, at the time to start a YouTube channel.
I mean, we were talking about even before we met at MagFest in person, because I remember thinking like that was the first convention either of us had really been to, or at least the first gaming specific convention.
Yeah.
And we were like, we didn't know what kind of things would be sold there. And we had read about like the Framemeister on, websites online. We thought like, well, what if like someone is selling Framemeisters there? What if they have them set up? Because we're like, oh man, that's like so much money, but we're probably going to buy it if we see it, aren't we? They didn't, no one was selling Framemeisters.
I was going to ask
yeah, I remember having that thought, like, what if they are? Because we were like, at the time we could not, it was like so frightening to think of like sinking that much money onto, like a retro gaming setup. But both of us had like kind of been talking about it, and then it was only like maybe 3 or 4 months later, I think Coury finally pulled the trigger on ordering one from Japan, and he's just like, I'm just going to do it. And so he ordered the Framemeister, and then it was so much different, like seeing a friend sending me screenshots of the results they were getting.
Yeah.
Compared to reading about it on other websites, because I was looking at it, I'm like, no, like you cannot get this kind of pixel precision quality out of original hardware with analog video cables. Like, that's not possible. But when Coury was showing it to me, it's like, okay, this is finally pushing me to dropping this, $300+ on this device, which, by the way, is like not what you should buy today. But at the time, it was
changed.
Yeah, it was a major first step for us
Yeah.
though,
Yeah.
in that quality journey. Yeah.
Well, then, so how did you guys get into? Did you guys come to being interested in the graphical fidelity of your old consoles separately, or is that something you kind of like, as you became friends online, maybe before you even met, that kind of cultivated through that relationship online?
I was a little bit ahead of it because Coury didn't even really know that much about S video, I don't think. Like I was
Right.
the one who was like preaching the good word of like, oh, hook up your Super Nintendo
Hmm.
with S video cables is going to look so much better. And I thought at the time that was the best quality you could get. And you like got into S video after that, and you're like, wow.
Well, yeah, a big reason for that is because at the time I was living in New York City and I did not have a lot of my games with me at that point. You know, a
Hmm.
lot of that stuff was in storage at my mom's house, and I was kind of out of games for like several years, I think. And it was through the backloggery that I kind of became reinterested in games. Uh, you know, like I was before I moved to New York, I was like working retail, like selling games. I was like buying too many games that I wasn't playing, and I just like decided to focus on a career like in video and in post
Yeah.
production. And I moved to New York, and I just like lived out of suitcases for the first year I was there. I just didn't bring anything with me. Actually, I think I brought my Game Boy Advance, and
So wait, so you didn't really see when you say you lived out of suitcases, do you mean you just kind of like hopped from hotel to hotel, or did you
no,
like,
I had like a
or
sublet.
did you like boondock and you like lived out of your car for a couple of years?
No, no, I did not bring a car or anything. I just like I brought three suitcases and I subletted a room um, from somebody, and then like I ended up actually inheriting that entire apartment because that person moved out, and then I just like took over the whole thing, got another roommate, and but I just like I had several suitcases that I just had clothes in, and I for like my first year there, it was basically just like work at this internship. I went to school for video production, but a lot of the stuff that I learned in school was kind of instantly obsolete. It was so I interned at a post production facility and answered phone calls in exchange for like taking as many classes as I wanted. But that's probably for later. But I didn't bring any of my game systems, and I just kind of I was just focused on my career. And like I became more interested in games from the backloggery because it was kind of because the backloggery is basically about playing the games that you have. Don't just like collect games and set them on a shelf. It's like about like tracking and like saying like, hey, I'm going to
Hmm.
play this game and I'm going to play it to the end. So that was that was like a structure that I desperately needed, I think, and probably like a lot of people, like a lot of
Oh,
game
I mean,
collectors need that kind of
I still need it.
yeah.
Yeah, I still
I mean,
need it.
I like I follow a lot of the philosophy of that still, but not to the extent that Try does. But I mean, I have so much stuff because I'm
Wow. I mean, once we started the YouTube channel, the problem was every time you see a game, you're like, ooh, like this game is interesting because
I
it
might
actually
need it.
has this graphical effect that you don't usually see on this system. Or
Yeah,
oh, this game is by the developers that did this, and that's interesting, and that might be useful for a future video topic. So
Hmm.
when you're doing YouTube, I think it's it's easy to persuade yourself that like, oh, buying all these games is useful potentially for future episodes. There was a long time where I actually completed. I had zero unfinished games on my shelves
Oh
um,
wow.
in 2008. I beat my backlog. The last game I had to beat was Super Ghouls and Ghosts on the Super Nintendo, and I did it.
Oh,
I
I'm
had
sorry.
zero unfinished games, but then for a while, after that, I tried to keep it like under 10, under 20. And then once we started the YouTube channel and, I started buying a lot more games, it's like, okay, I got like, there were a couple of years where I tried so hard to keep it under 100 unfinished games on my backlog. And then eventually like it got to be too much and I just I kind of I let myself go in terms of gaming backlog,
yeah,
but I mean, now I've got like, oh, it's so stupid. I mean, I've got like, 600 unfinished games now because it's just video games are so enticing, and sometimes they're such good deals.
yeah.
But I still have that perspective though of where when I buy a game, I'm not buying it just to put on my shelf. Like I
Right.
want to play this through to the end someday before I die. At least
Yeah.
that's the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's true for both of us. I mean, even though there's no way we could play every game that we have, we don't buy things that we have no interest in, like, eventually playing. You
Yeah,
know,
like
I like
or like I have no interest in like keeping like sealed games,
right.
for
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
instance.
we
same.
open everything that we get. And, it's just a way to make sure that we're only buying the stuff that we like, and it's not just to fill a shelf or, like.
Now, when you guys do collect, do you like if you're going to buy something you do intend on playing, do you also buy things that maybe you wouldn't want to play, but you find it so intriguing you can't help but own? For as a quick example of that, I have a complete in box like a Pico. I don't
Mhm.
really intend on doing a lot of gaming on a Pico. I just find
Right.
that console super fascinating, and really beating a game is as simple as flipping through the pages, so it's not really much of a game. But I bought it because it's fascinating to me. I like it a lot,
Yeah.
and so is there anything like that that you would buy or already have bought?
Well, hardware is a whole different thing. I mean, we have,
Well,
like,
games
multiple
or
versions
hardware,
of, like
anything.
of, like, different hardware just because it's like, "Oh, this version is slightly different than this one. This one has, like, a slightly different video output than what we have." But, I mean, definitely, there's certain things that I have. Like, I
Yeah.
have, like, some of the mini consoles because they're
Yeah.
totally fun to
Hmm.
collect and have, but it's also, like, I can reason, like, "Hey, I might need to show this
Yeah.
emulation as compared to something else."
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I have a fascination with getting redundant versions of Resident Evil games, for instance. Like, I just like, even though it's like I have no reason to like necessarily play through every version. It's just like there, I do like to deny it, but I have to admit that there is a little bit of a collector's mentality that creeps
Hmm.
in some of my purchase decisions. It's like, oh, or I just have to have this version of this game because I
Yeah.
really like this game, even though I already have a version of it that's just as
Yeah.
good.
Or
Or
this one
like,
runs slightly better than the other
yeah, I mean, you mentioned the mini consoles, like the Game and Watches, the Nintendo, the Mario, and
Those
the
are
Zelda.
so cool.
But I hate them. I hate them because I have no interest in using them. But it's like I can't not buy them though.
For me, it's like the novelty of it. The idea of a Game and Watch is just so novel to me, even
Yeah.
though it's not really practical. No, it's something that I just speaking of novelty gaming, and you guys might have already heard of this genre of games, but this was something completely new to me. Play by mail gaming, which was most popular, I would say, in the 70s, but it was something I had never heard of before, where people would it would be like a turn-based game with like a multiplayer turn-based game where the
Oh
players
yeah.
would mail in their moves to a company. The company would input them on a computer, and the computer would do all the calculations for the simulation and spit out results, and then they would mail those results back to the player, and then they would have to make their next move. And but you're basically only making like moves every once a month, maybe once every 2 weeks if your like mail system is like really good. But like I don't, it's not really a good way to game, but I just find that idea of that incredibly charming, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That would
It's
be
just
fun, just
fascinating.
like if there's like a two-player game that's like a strategy game, like I'm thinking like, "Oh, what if it's like a strategy game like on a cartridge?" I mean, something I'm probably not even thinking of, and you like mail that cartridge back and forth and like you
That
can
would
do
be
it.
kind of
Like
cool.
Yeah.
You could do that. There's I actually I used to work at a deli, and my coworker and I were not good employees. We would play like heavy metal in the in the
Mhm.
deli and stuff like that. Stuff that's not customer friendly, and we would just make sure to turn it off when people walked in. But we would in between making sandwich orders, we would actually have a DS that was there with Age of Empires for the DS, and that was turn based. So we would each take turns
Yep.
in between. So he would do an order and I would make my move. And then another customer would come in, I would make their order, he would make his move. And we just kind of kept switching it back and forth. So you could do something like that.
Yeah.
If you no, it'd be you just put on a battery pack to a DS and mail the whole thing across the country.
But I do like the idea of that almost more sort of analog side of gaming where you're using tools and services like kind of outside the game itself. Like
Yeah.
it's not something I do often, but I always really enjoy the experience when, I just have like a notebook and I
Mhm.
write notes for the game. Some of the best gaming experiences I had in the past decade were playing like Dragon Quest 2, or technically Dragon Warrior 2 and 3 on the NES.
Hmm.
And what amazed me about the experience playing those games was when I was talking to NPCs in them, these are relatively archaic JRPGs, but I found that almost every NPC said something that kind of was relevant or interesting, like,
Hmm.
like, oh, there's this monster in this tower, or this monster is weak against something, or I heard this, or I heard that. Like, and every time that I sort of followed up on something that the NPC said, I scratched it off. And by the end of the game, of both of those games, like, I had scratched off all the notes that I had written, which was a
Really?
lot. And I think a lot of people think like, oh, these old RPGs, like, they don't tell you where to go or what to do, or they're
Hmm.
just so hard to figure it out. You have to have a guide to get through it. And I did, admittedly look up maybe one or two things for those games, but not much. Like, and it really impressed me how actually comprehensive the information was in the game. You just kind of had to look for it. And that,
Mhm.
to me, stood in such strong contrast to RPGs that would come later, where what NPCs say is like largely world building, and or
Hmm.
just kind of
Right.
idle banter, and it's not really doesn't really directly affect the gameplay so much. So that that was just kind of an enlightening experience for me. And I think that uh it kind of made the act of talking to NPCs much less tedious and boring. And I do like, I wish I would do it more, or like using graph paper to like map out
Mhm.
I
dungeons
feel
and
like it'd be
stuff.
harder to do now though, because there's so much more dialogue in modern. Like if you do it with
Yeah.
a modern game, I should say, if you stick to it with retro games.
Right.
Now, when you did that, was that with like the original cartridge, or was it like
Yeah,
a
it
remake of
absolutely
it?
was.
It
Yeah,
was okay. So
it
that's
was the original cartridge, taking the risk on the
the localization
decades
there.
old battery. Yeah, well, and the localization. I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, like I said, I was able to get through those games using the in game information, which is what I prefer to do. But I'll look up game facts if I have to every now and then. But I try to see if I can figure it out on my own. But no, like, that was, I just thought that was a really fun experience.
That kind of reminds me, on Retronauts, Jeremy Parish has talked about he would draw his own maps with
Mhm.
Yeah,
Metroid. And I mean, that's a very, and the same with Zelda too. That was a very common experience for kids
yeah.
back
Yeah.
during that time, to like draw their own maps. That way they wouldn't have, I mean, you didn't have the internet to look up the maps, so you'd have to draw it all out yourself. But I kind of like you said, like that analog input, or that analog parallel or ancillary like part of the game that you can either games force you to have, or you can do on your own, whether it's maps, whether it's writing down dialogue trees like you did. And what's interesting, that play by mail thing, to kind of reference back to what kind of took us down this rabbit hole, that's still actually occurring, but when the term mail is a lot looser.
Yeah.
The most recent version of it, I was looking into it because I was just so fascinated. I might do a Patreon episode on it just because I found it interesting. There was a game released in 2018 that was technically a play by mail game, and it was a God of War game, like based off the new
What?
God of War series. It was
Really?
done in Facebook Messenger. So
Oh,
mail is very loosely used there.
right.
Obviously, you're
Yeah.
you're still sending a message to a computer, and the computer's running the simulation behind it and sending you out a result. But it's interesting, and technically, like, a lot of people don't know, like the original Oregon Trail was basically like that. It was done on a teletype. There
Oh,
was no
wow.
visual component. It was done on a teletype, and it would literally, the teletype would print out the computer's response to you. So you're just wasting a crap load of paper to play to play the original Oregon Trail. Um,
Corey always really loves bringing up this quote from kind of one of the very first documentary type
Mhm.
projects we did, where I visited Cyan,
mhm.
which still exists, the company behind Mist and Riven. And I interviewed Rand Miller there. And he dropped a quote that Corey really likes. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he says, like, when you take a part of a game and you bring it into the real world, or like make it atoms. I think is that
Yeah, like
how
when
he
you're
explained
writing
it.
down, because like Myst came with like a notebook.
Right.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
actually have Myst Complete in Box with the
Mm.
notebook in my
Yeah.
collection. So there we go.
Yeah.
But when you bring aspects of the game like into the real world, then it like makes it more real. Like it makes it
Mhm.
exist
It
in your world, like part of your world.
it's kind of like when you can take a gameplay aspect and then write it down, it almost makes like the gameplay more, how can I put it? It's no
More
longer
tangible.
restricted.
Yeah.
It's no longer restricted by like the programming. It
Right.
becomes something that you like process in your mind, essentially,
Right.
trying to figure it out.
That's an
Yeah.
interesting point. Sorry, were you going to say something, Corey?
Well, I mean, it's very similar to uh, like the schoolyard discussions you'd have like
Mhm.
growing
Yeah.
up, when there was no internet to get this information from, and you're figuring out a game, figuring out your way through it, and you have to share with your friends, or you draw things, like write certain things down for them, and it just transcends like kind of a electronic only experience. I mean, Trey and I had a situation like that with Breath of the Wild, but also we had a situation like that with Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom, where
Yes.
Mhm.
we got an early copy of the game, and there was no information out there. So we figured out we were able to 100% the game, like just like sharing information between the two of us. And it was really, really fun, because that game has really, really great puzzles that are not like too difficult, but also like, you're given all the tools to figure it out,
Mhm.
just like fairly easily. But it was just like a really great experience, and that's something that you don't get very often anymore.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that too. I feel like doing that type, having that kind of experience where you can do something outside in the real world that involves the game. I've talked about this before, like trying to recapture that whimsy, that sense of what is it? The sense of
Like
discovery that
Wonder
you
and
get
or
as a
yeah.
kid. Like when you first start playing video games, the game feels like it stretches beyond, a lot farther beyond the boundaries of the TV
Mm.
than it actually
Yes.
Oh
does.
yeah.
Once you start understanding how games work, then it kind of loses a bit of that illusion. You kind of
Mhm.
start understanding more and more, and it kind of ruins a little bit of that discovery, because now it's like I've referenced this before, like multiple times. I'll be playing a game downstairs, and my wife will be like, "Don't you want to go that way?" I'm like, "Nah, there's nothing down that way." And she goes, "How do you know?" I'm like, you develop a sixth sense." And of course,
Yeah.
there's times when I'm wrong and there was something down there, but by and large, like you kind of, when you play enough games, you start developing this mindset of how the designers
Mhm.
think, and when
Yeah.
something is down there and you don't. And of course, you'll be wrong at times, but for the most part, you're not. And so that, while games are still fun, that sense of discovery is what generally is what hooks most people to
Right.
start off. And I feel like the closest way we've been able to get that now as an adult is that real world experience. And I think back to the last time I truly felt that was Pokemon Go back in 2016, the summer of
Yeah, yeah.
2016, because you didn't understand, like, and I still don't, like, I didn't bother looking it up. I'm sure you could, but I didn't want to know what the algorithm was behind the scenes about how Pokemon spawned in the real world.
Mm.
Because then you would go out into the real world, and then you would start looking around, and you'd meet other people playing the game too. And so now you have this communal experience that you remember. And I still remember,
Right.
like, I've told the story before on the podcast, how like the night I caught a Pikachu for the first time in Pokemon Go, where it was 11:30 at night, almost midnight. I see in the, because you know how in Pokemon Go it says like it has like a nearby Pokemon meter or something
Right.
like that. It tells you what Pokemon are close. And I saw Pikachu. It was the first time we'd seen one. This was only a month or two after the game released. I burst out of my room and I went into my roommate's room, who I believe he was in his boxers. And I go, "Dude, there's a Pikachu nearby." He goes, "What?" And he throws on his clothes, and we drive out, and we start driving around the neighborhood trying to find this Pikachu. And I think we finally caught it at like a mall, like 2 miles down the road. It was just one of the best experiences I've ever had. And to kind of lend credence to what you're saying, that was a
Mhm.
real world experience combined with an in-game element.
Mhm.
Right.
Um, I'm with you on that. Now, to get back to kind of what you guys do with the show, with the YouTube channel,
Mhm.
I wanted to ask specifically, when did you first start becoming interested in high fidelity gaming? And what I mean by that is, like, you referenced before how, like, Try, you said you were singing the praises of S Video, and that's kind of first how you got to know each other and kind of start this dialogue. But how did both of you individually first kind of start wondering about what you could do more with your game consoles? I guess, Coury, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, probably when I saw, like, some captures of the Framemeister. That was probably the first, like, inkling I had of, like,
Hmm.
"Oh, I can make it look like this, like, with original systems?" Like, it just didn't even seem possible because, I mean, growing up, like, I was RF for so long, and then, it was, like, a huge jump to go to composite, and I was, like, basically, like, using composite all the way. I mean, heck, I think I used composite with my PS3 when I first got it.
And that's so tough on PS3 because I used it as well because I didn't have an
Text is
HDTV at
so
the time.
small. Like,
Oh,
I
no.
got the system to play Metal Gear Solid 4, and, like, the text in that was just, like, so small.
Mhm.
I was like, on a
Mhm.
27-inch CRT, it was pretty painful to play.
I
I
believe it.
thought I've often thought about, like, trying it again just to see what I was really putting myself through,
That would actually
but
be a really funny video to do. Like, you could, like, just kind of like
like,
as,
what
like,
how many of these games can be played on, like, on
don't
CRT?
kill yourself for it because you're gonna be literally torturing yourself with painful
Well, I
graphics
mean, you
and
did do that video
text.
that was all the way to downscaling to 240p, and some people were just
You're
like,
right.
"Why 240p?"
Yeah,
Why
Like,
not
you went
exactly.
even
120?
farther in some ways, but you were picking games where it would be
Where it
kind of
seemed
logical, not Metal Gear Solid 4.
right, right, where it seemed appropriate. But I mean,
Yeah.
it was probably when I saw the Framemeister, I didn't realize that it was actually even possible. I mean, the site we
Yeah.
looked at was that like Hazard City. It was Fudo's site, which
Yes.
was the had these
HazardCity.de.
right.
Germany? A German site?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
it is. Yep.
Interesting.
Interestingly, like a lot of that at that time, I feel like a lot of the information about upscaling and RGB video on game consoles was coming out of from European sources,
Mhm.
and I think in part that's because they knew about RGB because they had it available on their TVs,
Mhm.
and also I think because there was this people who were really, high level enthusiast level, like the people who understood that, oh, these 50 hertz game conversions are like not how most of the games were designed to be. So they had to, they were seeking out methods to, play their games in 60 hertz. And, I think that kind of just developed in a lot of people in Europe this mindset. Like, for example, I interviewed several years ago Rachel Selesky,
Mhm.
who runs the website Retro Access, which she makes RGB cables. And she's from the UK originally, but she lives in the US and sells, handmade, really high quality
Interesting.
RGB cables, in the US. And when I interviewed her, she said that using RGB kind of came naturally from people who were interested in imports. Like she was a really big fan of the Sega Saturn, and most of the great or I don't know if I should say most of the great, but like Sega Saturn had a much bigger
Mm.
presence in Japan.
Yes, yeah,
And
it
lots
flopped
of
here.
RPGs and stuff like that that were just not localized outside of the country. So, for a Sega Saturn fan, uh, importing was very appealing. And of course, she and many others wanted to play their games at 60 hertz. And she said that even if you got a 60 hertz compatible TV in Europe, the composite wavelength was like not compatible. Like the
The video
NTSC or 60
signal.
hertz was not compatible
Yeah.
with those 60 hertz PAL TVs, so they would be black and white. So the only way that they actually could play uh, RGB or the only way they could play 60 hertz on PAL TVs was to use RGB because it got around that limitation.
That's interesting. So it was a necessity of the the import community almost, just to
So I think that's a big
that
reason why that information took off there, because like Corey said, we thought that S video was as good as it got. I mean, to get back to your original question, uh interest in video fidelity, I guess, started maybe a little earlier for me, because I mean, I grew up with RF only TVs. When I got
mhm.
I went NES, Super Nintendo, N64. N64 didn't include an RF switch. And so it was like, oh, well, how do you hook it up? Well, you had to route it through your VCR if you didn't have, or you had to get the RF switch separately. But, I had to route through my VCR because I only had RF on my TVs. And that was all the way up until college. I went to college in 2002, and before college, I got a new computer monitor. Of course, it was a CRT. And it was
Yeah.
like, I was so impressed by the quality of it. I was like, you know what? Like, if I could play my video games on this, then I wouldn't have to have, have a computer monitor and a TV taking up space in my, tiny college dorm.
Yeah.
So I started looking into like how could I hook up video games to this monitor? And I found that you could buy at Best Buy this ViewSonic composite and S video to VGA converter or upscaler. And I bought it and I thought it looked amazing. It was the first time I had access to S video. So of course I bought S video cables. Um, and I used that, up until my last year of college, when I had a bit more space and was able to get
Yeah.
a proper CRT TV in there. But I thought it was amazing. There was probably a lot of lag, probably a lot of issues with the signal, but I think because of that, like, I kind of sidestepped for a while, like, understanding like what advantages like a standard CRT television actually gave to games,
Mhm.
because um going to that, even though it was a CRT computer monitor, just running S video on, it still was upscaled. So I didn't really have like the CRT effect. I had sort of more of a somewhat blurry pixel effect. And that was, I guess, how I kind of started to see games as being. There's a lot of debate like, oh, some people like have to have scan lines, some people want that crisp, very razor sharp pixel look. And I kind of like both. I appreciate both, but it took me a longer time to appreciate the like scan line standard television look of retro games. I definitely appreciate it now, but it took me a longer time because of that
Yeah.
kind of sidestep
Mhm.
from RF only to suddenly being able to use S video on a pretty high fidelity computer monitor.
And
Right.
that's kind of been a conversation that a lot of people in this community has been having for a good number of years. Like, what's the proper way to present these old games? Because it really just is a matter of preference. And you guys really make very clear indications of that in your videos. You're not trying to tell people this is the best. This is
Right.
the end of all, or the best of the best, like the end all be
Yeah.
all of playing your old games, because everyone has a different preference on how games look. You were talking before how like everything went through the RF switch in the back. I actually had when I was growing up, I had a CRT in my bedroom, and there was a a video cord that could hook up all three at once: a Dreamcast, a PS1, and an N64. It was just three little wires, and they all connected to the center, and then you would feed that one thing into the RF switch in the back. And I remember, actually, it's a funny story because I now know that S video is better than composite and obviously much better than RF. But when I was a kid, I was like, S video is not better. That's one cord. This is three cords. Clearly,
Yep. Yep.
clear. Not understanding that two of the three chords on composite are just audio.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
still dealing with only one video cord. And just for listeners, we've been throwing out terms like composite and RF and S video and RGB and all this other stuff. Just a really quick breakdown of that. If you remember having to plug in that, like, it has a little screw socket on the back of your TV, and you would plug in your consoles through that. That's your RF adapter. That is like that transmits your audio, your video, everything in one wire. But because it's kind of I don't know if it's one wire. You guys would know better than I do, but it's at least all into one source.
Mhm.
And because it's not to say that it doesn't look great, but or not to say that it looks like the worst, but it's the least quality in terms of signal. In terms of it's very
Yeah.
it's
It's
not a
the
clean
dirtiest
signal.
signal, I
The
guess.
dirtiest signal, yeah. The
But there's
dirtiest.
an appeal to
There is an
that dirty.
appeal. Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Sorry,
I
you're good.
guarantee, like, this is probably how most people remember playing the
Yeah.
NES.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
most yeah. Composite is what most people are used to now. If in terms of analog signals, it's the yellow, white, and red cords that go into the back of your TV. S video you usually combine with the white and red cords because that's your audio signals, and then the S video is just a different kind of video signal, which is a better quality. And RGB is kind of similar to your component video source that you would see kind of with the Xbox 360 era, and you would sometimes see with the PS2 and Xbox and GameCube. There was component cables you could buy for those to get better video quality. But in a nutshell, those are kind of like the tiers of analog video signal, and then after that you have HDMI or digital video. But just that's a very bare bones primer. Like if you learn anything from this, it should be to learn to go watch your channel, because one of the things I love about your guys' channel is that you break down this technology in ways that is much easier for someone to understand who does not understand tech, if that makes sense. Like
Well,
you're
yeah.
good at communicating these complex topics and not necessarily going into the nitty gritty of like how exactly an analog signal works. Like how does this electronic thing give information when it's not digital, even though it's like kind of digital but kind of not. It's like I'm still very confused by how analog signals work, I'll be honest. But the nice thing is you're not going into that detail because that's not what's important. What's important is understanding which video signals provide the best quality for your retro game consoles. And I like that's what you kind of focus on your channel. And actually
Yeah, well, and it's
sorry, go
really
ahead.
because we don't understand. We don't understand
Exactly,
I mean, we were frustrated as well by, most of the conversation being tech people on tech forums, and it was very hard to penetrate. And so
Like, usually, like,
really,
walls of text.
yeah, and it's just like, well, I don't understand this. And then like once it clicked with us, it's like I always like to say that the videos are dumbing it down to my level.
Mm-hmm.
I once I've like captured an understanding of it in my head, and we always like, especially with the tech stuff, we like to run it by people who actually are, really smart,
Really?
engineering types
Yeah,
to make sure that we're not like characterizing it incorrectly.
right.
Um, but we kind of try to be like a bridge between those worlds, right? Because we we don't, we aren't engineers.
Mhm.
We could never make the tech. We don't understand exactly what makes it tick, but we understand that, oh, you can hook these things up and, it looks like this. And also, you know sort of a learning process has also been like, sort of the understanding how to present it, in terms of like, what really is the proper aspect
Mhm.
ratio and stuff. Like that's kind of been something that's been a lot more interesting to me lately is, how the pixels are presented in, a digital conversion, because it's not just square pixels, because the TVs, CRT TVs, the pixels would usually be either wider than square or skinnier than square, depending on the output resolution. And
Interesting. Okay.
most of the time, like these, compilations of classic games, I would say get it wrong more often than they get it right.
I
Uh,
mean, it's hard to approximate a CRT through digital technology like that.
yeah,
It's incredibly difficult to do.
I mean,
yeah.
it's possible to do, but with, it takes they have to, like, it has to be, like, given special attention to do it.
Yeah.
It takes, I think, specialized knowledge that
Yeah.
a lot of people at the game studios that have been contracted to make these collections may not really know. Like,
Yeah.
sure, you can create an emulator. You understand, you have the information that tells you how like a Sega Genesis works or whatever.
Yeah.
You can make it run, but then there's that kind of that final step of, well, how was this actually presented on a CRT TV? And most people just don't have the access
Mhm.
to that hardware to really reference it. And
Right.
There's definitely challenges there. I mean, people in the kind of individual people or teams of people in the classic gaming scene have really kind of honed it in recent years in a way that most like commercially sold projects have not. When you look at things like
Exactly.
the RetroTink 5X, the
Mhm.
Mr. FPGA project, some of the newer HDMI mods, like the N64 Digital from Pixel FX,
Mhm.
those have like extremely robust scaling capabilities and scanline and even like CRT like shadow mask sort of
Wow, okay.
overlays. They have so many ways to really come so much closer to replicating that CRT look in a variety of ways. And yes, there are like GPU shaders and stuff for software emulation as well. But it really is like on that kind of community driven hardware and software side where I think the most of the biggest advancements have been made. And I'm hoping that the commercial products can start to learn from those.
Yeah. I mean, in some cases, I think they have. Like, I think a good example is Digital Eclipse.
Mhm. I
Like,
was actually thinking about Mike Micah and his team over there.
yeah. I mean, back in the day, like their emulation, like they had these really huge compilations of games, and they were okay for the time. But you look back at them now, and they're like, "Oh, it was pretty messy." But like they have really stepped up their game, and they've figured it out like really, really good. Just like in the last several years, kind of when they changed focus, I guess, is more of instead of like a mass emulation developer versus like a curated collection and like experience. Like we're gonna make this small group of games be as good as they possibly can.
And also, it kind of reminds me, you guys did a mini documentary on them, M2.
Yep. Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, M2
M2
is
is
like
also like does a lot. Like the attention to detail in their emulation and their ports is just astounding. I remember listening to Retronauts. Jeremy Parrish was talking about their arcade ports for the
Mhm.
3DS, like the Sega Ages ports, and
Right.
how they would
Yeah,
actually try to do their best to recreate the arcade cabinet experience, but on a
Mhm.
handheld console, which it's not going to be the same by any stretch of the imagination. But the fact that they took the time and attention to at least attempt
Mhm.
that is admirable.
Yes. I mean, and they were way ahead of the curve, I think, with this stuff. But I
Hmm.
mean, even they like certainly have some quirks that we wish that in terms of like pixel aspects that we wish that they would overcome and just kind of let go
yeah,
of. And for some reason, they are still not like interpolating
yeah.
I guess the pixels or whatever.
I
Yeah.
have no
Yeah,
idea.
I mean
You when
that's the big point I'm always hammering on is interpolation because if
Wait,
you're
sorry,
going
real quick. I was just gonna say interpolation pixels. Because I don't understand what that means. Are you talking about what you referenced before about the size of the pixels? How some are wider and some are
right,
thinner, that
so
kind
I
of
mean,
thing.
kind of the quick and dirty way to get the 4:3 aspect ratio. Like a good example would be let's take the NES Classic Edition. The
Yes.
little 720p NES mini console. It has an option for displaying pixel perfect, and I think most people would think like, oh, like that's what I should do, like because the pixels are square and 1-to-1 sizing. But on a CRT TV, those pixels are actually wider than tall. So if you choose the 4:3 option in on the NES Classic, it does make it 4:3, but the pixels are different sizes.
Hmm.
So, you've got one column of pixels will be skinnier, and then the one next to it might be wider. And the effect of that, since video games so often rely on sort of this lateral scrolling movement, it looks like the image is shimmering as it scrolls by because the background graphics are, parts of it are wider or skinnier
Yeah.
depending on which
So it looks yeah,
column of pixels it's
looks
in.
wavy kind of
Yeah. So
Interesting.
then
Okay.
like a ribbon
the
almost.
Super Nintendo Classic Edition actually addressed this. It's still a 720p output, but it uses interpolation, which gives this slight softening effect to the pixel edges on the horizontal axis. So while it's not as sharp necessarily,
I mean, it's still
it
really, really
it
sharp,
still
but
looks sharp. Like the purpose of interpolation is to maintain the appearance of sharpness from, normal sitting distance. But if you were to put your nose up to it, you'd see that there's sort of like there's a bit of a blending on the pixel edges.
Yeah.
But the impression then is that the pixels are now all the same size rather than different sizes, and you don't get that shimmering effect anymore. So, but this is a problem that, can happen at, from, 720p and on up to,
any
1080p and beyond.
HD signal,
So a lot of emulator developers, and unfortunately, much as we love those guys, M2 doesn't always really implement this as we would want them to. We want that interpolation that lets you maintain that correct 4:3 aspect ratio without the shimmering. That's what interpolation does, because it kind of does the math to kind of understand, like, well, what would it be like blending these two pixel edges together?
I gotcha.
So
I gotcha.
that's a point I always really hammer home on, because it's overlooked so often, and it's critical if you want to have the correct aspect.
It's maybe one of the most important aspects, I think, that
and it's
not enough
overlooked.
people are incorporating.
No pun intended with the aspect ratio thing before.
Yes.
This is a bit of a non sequitur. Do you guys have any experience in improv or some type of theater? The reason I ask is because since you are able to communicate these pretty complex ideas, these pretty complex ideas, and communicate them in a way it's more palatable. Do either of you have any experience in improv that kind of helps you to communicate?
No,
we wish.
None, 0.
I mean, as you can tell, especially by listening to me, I have a lot of filler words in my speech and stuff. My brain doesn't always move at the same pace as my mouth. We script our videos for a reason. That's because it's a much easier way for us to get our thoughts organized and stuff like that. I mean, in college, my English professor tried to talk me into taking technical writing as a minor, which I did not do, because I wanted to
Why
graduate.
Would you ever need that?
Yeah, well, I mean, he saw that I was a good writer. I mean, he said, like, oh, like you're like, he just said, you're one of the best writers I've actually had in this class in many years. Like, you should take this minor. And I didn't, because I wanted to graduate in 4 years at all costs. I did not want to take on more work, because if I took on more work, then I wouldn't have time for video games. So, but I guess I say that to say, like, he kind of saw, I guess, that potential from the work I did in his class. And I, even though I didn't take the classes, I think I kind of used the fact that he wanted me to do that, and kind of his encouragement to, like, kind of help myself understand my strengths. And so I do think that I guess I kind of do have that sort of mindset that helps me sort of break down these technical concepts into something that can be more easily understood. So, I guess that's the aspect that helps. But no, we cannot go like unscripted or improv. No, we cannot. I mean, most of my presentation ability kind of comes from, I after I graduated college, I worked for gosh, maybe 12 years at the college I graduated from, at TV studio, which kind of later merged into the marketing department. So I was doing video stuff through work, and at one point my boss, he was a former TV reporter, and we did some sort of news style shows for the college with him. And I kind of, just by observation and osmosis, kind of learned his, like, mannerisms and how he presented, because I had no experience doing that kind of stuff. And I think Coury then, by extension, kind of adopted some of those techniques as well.
Right. And I mean, when we started the channel, we had no intention of ever being on camera.
Yeah.
It was several episodes before we were ever on camera, and we thought it was just going to be voiceover. I never thought in a million years that I would be doing something like public facing like this and appearing on camera. And it's like if you've watched the channel from the early days, like I feel as though we've definitely improved significantly with practice and just like our delivery, our comfort level. But Try is like such a good writer. I'm always so envious that he's like such a good writer because the writing process is the part that I struggled the most with.
Mm-hmm.
And like I sometimes I just like have ideas and then I can't fully flesh them out. He always like does like a pass on like whatever scripts we're doing because he's just so good at making it so it doesn't sound like you're just repeating the same thing over and over again. And
Yeah.
like kind of I guess a downside to that is something we struggled with in addition to that is that like by doing that, like our videos have just gotten longer and longer and longer. And sometimes we just got to say like, all right, we got to cut this stuff. And Try's like really done a good job at saying like he did wrote an article for a magazine last year, and they had him go through like a big editing process of it. And I think that now he really enjoys that. Cutting it
Yeah.
down is getting the script as tight as
Right. Like
possible.
it was kind of a big eye-opening moment for me because you have this thing, you're like, oh, I can't cut this. I have to have this. And then you're like, but I have to get down to X number of words. And like I kept going through passes of this article. It was about it was about upscaling old video games. Ironically enough, it was for a magazine called Wireframe, which is run by the Raspberry Pi Foundation,
Huh.
which I mean, it has very much like an educational sort of focus. Obviously Raspberry Pis aren't just for emulation like people in the retro scene think of. I thought it
Yeah.
was funny, like, it's an article for the Raspberry Pi Foundation about
Something that's
using
kind of
original.
synonymous with like bare bones emulation.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No
I
offense
mean,
to the Raspberry Pi
oh,
team, of
absolutely
course.
not, absolutely not. I
Definitely
mean,
not.
it's a a very very useful tool for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. I actually, as I started getting closer and closer to the target, it's like it was kind of this challenge. Like, oh, I can get it. Like I'm starting to see like how much closer I can get to getting to this number of words. And so like uh more recently I've been challenging myself when I finish scripts. Like, okay, I'm going to do a word count once I get the full first draft done. I do a word count. I'm like, I'm going to cut this down by 20% or 30%. And I find out what would be the word count if I cut 20 or 30% out of it. And like I just work out and work out and work out until I actually get down to that amount. And then in editing, though, we come up with all these things like, oh, this needs to be clarified, or oh,
Yeah.
we just learned about this. And then it ends up creeping back up to that original
Yeah.
word count,
That's
unfortunately.
and that is like one of the toughest parts about doing the kind of videos that we do is that we try to make them as complete as possible. I guess evergreen would be a good term for it, something
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
like will stand the test of time. And for products that are just coming out, like stuff changes so quickly that it's you're always adding stuff up to until like the last minute. I mean, most obviously that was the case with this Mr. video that we did on the Mr. FPGA.
Mhm.
It came out. I mean that video took a long time to make. It was almost 3 hours
Like
long.
it took like
Yeah.
3 months to make.
Yeah, but I was working on it like off and on for a year.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
And
Wow.
the final form of it, it was kind of mostly kind of rebooted,
yes.
and
And
yeah,
and
I
we were
mean,
like
right now,
adding stuff until the last minute on that. And I even say in that video, I said, this stuff is going to be outdated like tomorrow. It's going to be outdated like the second this video goes live because of the like ever shifting
Yeah.
yeah.
scene. Everything is like happening in it all the
If,
time.
at the same time, though, I think it ended up being a lot more. I think it has over these months stood the test of time
Absolutely.
better
Yeah.
than we thought it would. I think people have really latched onto it as like this is the new starting point for Mister, like
Yes.
this video. So yeah, it's been more useful for more people for longer than I think maybe we feared, and I
Yeah. And
think
I
it
Now
will
think
continue to be.
it'll just continue to show the potential, like, I think that's
Yeah.
what's so
Exactly.
exciting about it, is people will see this potential and be like, "Oh, this sounds like something I can get into." But, I say
Yeah.
in the video, I said, it's important for you to, like, take an active role in following what's happening, because things are gonna be inevitably gonna be different than what you're seeing here.
Yeah. Now, this brings me to so many different questions that I want to get into here. So, first off, the reason to kind of bring it back to a second, the reason I asked about improv, and listeners, I am going to apologize for like the next like 6 months in advance. I've been obsessed with this new podcast. It's not new, but it's new to me, called Clear and Vivid with Alan Alda. For those who remember who Alan Alda is, he's a Hawkeye from MASH, if you remember that TV show. And it's all about communication. It's about how we communicate and connect with each other. And you guys, one of the focal points of your videos is how you communicate, like I said, these complex topics to people who may not be part of this community or not involved in the tech side of this community. So the reason I asked if you took improv, because one of the things that Alan Alda does, he has a charity foundation that this podcast helps fund, that one of the things they do is they actually teach improv classes to scientists, because it gives scientists a
Ah.
way to learn how to communicate to each other, to communicate, and then you then translate that to people, like be able to relay that information, something that's much more understandable and manageable. And there was actually an episode he did with Tina Fey where it was a couple of years ago, and they brought this astrophysicist up, and he was trying to explain string theory to Tina Fey. This feels like a plot of a TV show, but that's what happened in this podcast. It was trying to explain string theory to her. And I'll be honest, I don't understand string theory. So I'm not claiming that I do.
Likewise.
But anytime they gave Tina Fey a buzzer, and anytime he explained something that she didn't understand, she would buzz it. And the first like 5 minutes, it was just buzz, 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 because it's just like it's these crazy complex topics, and how do you turn it into something that they can understand? And
Mhm.
you guys do a really good job of that, and that's kind of why I asked about the improv thing. And the Alan Alda thing will tie into something I'm going to ask at the end of the episode, but that's for another point. And
So
now,
that's really cool,
sorry,
though.
go
I mean,
ahead.
that's something that I've kind of been looking into, finding locally, is like seeing if I could go to somebody to, like, improve my on-camera performance, I guess. But like, I'm gonna look into improv classes. That's like a class, like, I mean, that's like a word combination that I never looked at or thought of.
it's I took one improv class when I was in college, and I really loved it. It
Mm.
was a lot of fun, and it's just so fun and goofy to improvise. And I would also suggest listening to the Clear and Vivid podcast.
I'm definitely gonna check that out.
The best way I can describe Alan Alda in his interviews with people, because he interviews celebrities, but he also interviews like professors, and he had Neil deGrasse Tyson on. He had Betty White on before she passed away. But the best way I can describe his interview style is that he's one of the best active listeners I've ever
Mhm.
listened to. Like, if you this isn't a literal description, but like, if you would listen to his podcast and say there was just a moment of silence that neither one is speaking, you could still somehow hear him listening to the person, even though nothing's being said. Like, he's that intent. Like, he's a very
Right.
intense listener, and I really respect that. But
Yeah.
um when you're talking about different episodes and like your workflow and everything, I wanted to lead that into, how did you come up with the idea of starting the channel, and then in turn, how did it turn from, because I'm looking at some of your oldest episodes where you're kind of doing specific episodes on video games.
Yeah.
How did that then turn into be like, well, let's become known for we're the visual fidelity guys? How did that happen?
Never anticipated being known for the thing that we're doing. I mean, that first, like, the RGB and the FrameMeister was, like, just initially meant to be, like, a one-off thing. Like, we didn't think that it would ever lead to anything. It's just that we wanted to do a video on something that we thought was kinda neat and, change the way that we played games. We
Yeah.
never expected for people to, connect to it. I mean, if you go back to our earliest episodes, they are, how to win videotapes of, like, modern games, I guess, for the time. Growing
Hmm.
up, like, I used to rent these videotapes, like the game players game tapes, where you would, it'd have, like, walkthroughs of games,
Yeah.
and with, like, kind of with a voiceover that by somebody who wasn't quite sure what what they were saying. And I'd always had like an affinity for like kind of kitschy things like that. And when we first like started the channel, I was like, oh, we should make this, because this is like an idea that I had, is like to make these. And
You were talking about that before we'd ever met in person.
oh yeah. I mean, I thought it'd be really funny to make that with new games. And we captured all this stuff like in is the best quality that we could at the time. And then we output it to a VHS and then recorded that back. So like the VHS effect that you see in those early videos, it's all legit. Like we never
That's
used
kind
any
of awesome.
filters or anything like that. We put everything out to a real VCR and then back into our system.
That's
I
fantastic.
even used like a authentic early 90s text generator,
Yeah.
like, for the text in the video. Like, so yeah, it's pretty real.
So, like, I guess at the time, the idea was like we with those first ones, we were never like, we're not going to even be on camera. Like the person who does the voiceover is actually the news trained boss that Try was talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we thought it was very funny to write these scripts and have him read it without any context, because we didn't want him to be able to like, he'd be able to, he would pronounce certain names wrong. And there's
love
something
that.
like really, I don't know, just
I want his confusion to sound authentic.
Yeah.
It's nostalgic for you, and it's funny for other people who may not have
Right.
that same level of nostalgia.
Yeah. So the idea was that we would release those. I mean, this is like, we were like, oh, we'll release a video every week, because we had video training, like Try had a lot of training behind the camera. I had very little training behind the camera. Like mine was mostly like in the edit bay. And we just said, like, we're going to use our skills to do this, because I think at the time both of us were working on things that we didn't find particularly exciting. Like Try was working at a college, like doing different videos for them, and I was working at a post house in New York City. But a lot of the stuff that I was working on was medical things that were like, it was like really depressing. And like, when new drugs would get approved for release, they'd make these little like promo things with like doctors talking about like terminal diseases and everything. And that's what I spent a lot of my time working on, like professionally. So the channel was a way for us to, just channel those talents into something that we cared about.
Yeah.
And and it's funny because like we created these capture scenarios. Like Try had already had a capture scenario set up at home, because he was streaming for the Backloggery like way before it was even a phenomenon, I guess. Like he was streaming on Justin.tv like before it was even released or anything.
Before it became Twitch.
Yeah. 2008. We started streaming in 2008. So
yeah, and it's crazy to think about now. But so those first few videos were just like us like making it look as bad as we could. But in between, we're like, oh, well, let's do like some videos on games that we like.
Yeah, like the idea behind the how to beat stuff was mostly just, well, this will be really easy and fun to do, and it'll be a way no one else is doing anything like this, so we kind of thought it would kind of be a good way to draw people to our channel early on, and I think it was effective. I mean, it's not like we had like an immediate like mega success or anything, but I think it got enough attention. Like Way Forward retweeted our How to Beat DuckTales, and I think Nintendo of America retweeted How to Beat Shovel Knight.
Yeah,
really.
And,
wow.
I'm rather proud of it though that we did that when we did, because I feel like we were slightly ahead of the curve of the VHS aesthetic becoming really popular, like the vaporwave look to things that is like really really popular right now. But and a lot of those use filters, but we
most people would not know that we did real VHS tapes.
Yeah,
that's kind of awesome. I mean, it's not surprising that you got so much success when you first did that, or at least a little bit of success to start off, because your production quality has always been super high. And like now that I know both of you, I mean, I'm not surprised to hear that you have a background in video production, and that makes a lot of sense with how quality your videos are. But that's a lot of work for something to have that VHS feel, by literally being like, I'm going to record this onto a VHS tape and then record off the VHS tape back digitally.
Yeah.
Like it's going digital to analog back to digital again.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, those videos hold up really well, I think, because of what, they were as good as they needed to be, which is to say they're like kind of bad, but intentionally bad. But
But
then like the
it's
stuff,
not like we play. It's my favorite thing about them is that we play it straight all the time.
yes,
We don't draw attention to like, hey, this is supposed to be funny.
right,
Like we
right,
want
right.
it to just be like, hey, that we're presenting these as if they had like really existed.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
wasn't
we have,
really so much a series of jokes as it was like, I mean, yes, the scripts were like a lot of. I would write in things that would be like incorrect observations that were intentional. I would make an intentionally like incorrect observation about what this enemy is or what this
Yeah,
item
yeah.
is or what's going on, because like I was thinking in the mindset of the NES games where sometimes it is visually unclear, like what is this, you
yeah,
know? So we did have stuff in there, but it wasn't like jokes per se. But no, but then once we got into like the videos where it's just us talking about a game, you say that we've always had high production quality, but like it is so embarrassing to I will not go back and look at those early videos because I hate my delivery. I hate some how I shot the B-roll. I hate how I did this or that. And, it kind of does go to show that even though we did have the, experience in video production for years, that, experience still, is the most important thing. And the more experience we got doing this stuff, the
mhm,
better our stuff got
right.
over the years. I mean, it's really hard to go back and look at videos from like 2015 or something. I'm just
Well,
like,
with
oh,
those old episodes, I think that that was really before we started doing a lot of B-roll shots. Now, like a lot of our episodes are shot on camera, like with the whatever we're covering. There's a lot of stuff
Yeah.
like that. But if you go back to those early episodes, there is like barely any. And I think at the time we were like really focused on just having it being a really, really tightly edited experience where we don't just like let footage like play for a long time. We show a
right.
lot on screen and
Yeah,
it
like we
moves
typically
because of
don't
that.
recycle shots in an episode.
Yeah.
Sometimes we make exceptions, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
We're trying to make more of an exception these days, I think.
yes,
We have
because we
so
spend too much
much.
time on stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, your episodes are getting so much longer. Like your first episode on Ducktales was 10 minutes, and your most recent one now was from your May pickups.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, but
that's
that's
kind
And
of an
that's more of a kind
unusual
of an
episode.
informal. That's a little
yeah.
less more informal. But even if you go back to like your review for the LG C2 OLED, um, that was almost an hour, and
I
then
know, that's so
your Mr.
stupid.
FPGA one that you referenced was 2 hours and 40 minutes. Like these are not long. These are not short videos.
Yeah, I
No,
mean they're
but I mean,
movies.
not only have the videos been getting longer, but unfortunately, just like they've been they've been infrequent lately.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I mean, it's just been a variety of factors. I in particular have just like had so much more freelance work than usual the past few months.
Hmm.
That's kind of kept me away from focusing on my next my life and gaming episodes as much as I want. Corey has like a full time work from home video position as well. So it has been a little difficult for us to get to the episodes lately, but we're kind of sorting through lately, like how do we rebalance and refocus and and get
Yeah.
things together
And
again. At least we still have a persistent presence with weekly
exactly.
streams on Sunday. That
And
that
Yeah.
still lets us connect with our audience.
I think that's okay. I mean, you look at our video library that we've like of episodes. I mean, we have over 200 fully produced videos at this point. We stream every week for 3 to 4 hours every Sunday night, and we've been doing it since 2013. I mean, our first video came out in October of 2013, so it's 9 years. Like, I think that it's okay for us to take a couple of months to just kind of recalibrate
No,
and figure out our our lives, I guess.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, just for the sheer fact of the fact that your stuff is so in depth.
Mhm.
It's not like when I do a podcast, the reason I do podcasts in the first place, I tried my hand at YouTube. By try, I mean, that's a very, no pun intended with try's actual name, but like um, no pun intended with that, but like I tried it out, and it's just video production's a lot of work. People
It
don't
is.
realize how much work it actually is. Like, to especially like the YouTubers that do weekly content, they have professional editors they've hired.
Mhm.
And even with you guys, say you hire someone outside of you two to edit a video, this is still like let's go with your most recent your most recent one, the hour-long one that's not that's a produced video, right?
Yeah.
Um
The
and
OLED.
like I made little action shorts that like you can find on an old YouTube channel that would look like airsoft guns and bad editing muzzle flares and all this other stuff. I would spend 6 hours just setting all the shots and for a 4-minute video. Now, I would assume it's a little bit more streamlined since A, you have video production experience, B, it also you're maybe not moving locations hopefully as much. But even so, like 4 hours of shooting for 4 minutes of video is not a good return on your investment in
No.
terms of
No.
amount of time.
No,
So
I
like
mean,
you see 1 hour long video, I have no idea how many hours that took you. I'm going to guess and say maybe 30 to 50 hours
Yeah.
it's.
between
I mean,
everything.
you're absolutely right. It's like it's such a stupid return on investment because I mean, if you think about, I mean, you know, you're writing an article for a website. You write it, you post it, you're done. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, not to downplay the work that goes into a podcast, but obviously you're able to keep it super consistent, right? You
Mhm.
know, because it is less work than making a video
It
because you're
is.
just doing the audio side of it. I do not at all mean to downplay that, but then when
No,
you
I
look
don't
at a
take it that way.
video, you're doing the writing, the
Mhm.
audio recording, and then all this video stuff on top of that. And yeah, it is so many more steps, and
Yeah. It's a
it's
lot of work.
kind of stupid, but like you're talking about that OLED video, and that one, I actually took a lot more shortcuts with that one than I normally allow myself to, in the sense that the B-roll is like visually a lot simpler. There's like a lot of just this side by side shot of like two different OLEDs and stuff like that where I didn't even move the camera. There's a lot more of me just talking on camera without going to B-roll for a really long time.
Mhm.
And I had to do it that way, especially because, well, I started off that way while I was just reviewing the C2 OLED, which is, you know, the newer one that I didn't like, and I
Mhm.
exchanged it for the last year's model, which has, you know, the features that I wanted. And I, since I was returning the newer model, I had to like do this in a way that could be really quick, because I wasn't going to have access to it after the exchange. And I still wanted it to be done quickly because we don't often do videos on brand new products that have like a wide appeal.
Mhm.
Um, so
on
yeah,
on TV. Like, it was like our essentially like our first TV review and probably our last.
yeah, I guess I say all that to say that even though I felt like I was cutting a lot of corners, you know, it's more of me just being a talking head on camera. It's more of very similar looking shots where, yeah, there's a different game on the screen, but it's like the same shot again and again. Uh,
And a big part of that is because the progression of the episode did not play out anywhere like you were expecting it to.
right,
You
right,
had a
right.
lot of curveballs and, you know, the TV, like, didn't do what you needed it to do, and
Right, right. I mean,
you thought it was
it
gonna be
was
like, "Alright, I'm gonna do this," 'cause when you went into it, you were like, "Oh, this is gonna be shouldn't be too hard. I think it'd be really fun to do," and, like, by the end, you're like, "Oh god."
yeah,
I
I know because I expected the 2022 model to work just as well or better compared to the 2021 model, and that was not at all the case. So yeah, it was, even though I cut production wise, I felt like I was cutting corners. It was still just like some of the hardest I've ever worked in my life because I was getting it done in a relatively short time
Mhm.
frame, and it was just a frustrating experience with the TV itself.
Yeah,
But there
and he was returning it.
people were so appreciative of that episode. They're like, even
Yeah.
though I at the end I'm like, I hated doing this. I'm never doing a TV review again. People were like, we need you to do this because like other TV reviewers aren't answering our weird retro gaming questions. You know, how do these strange devices that are often a little bit off spec compared to, your PlayStation 5 or your Xbox Series X. Like, how do they work? Those were the questions I wanted answered.
Mhm.
And so it was a messy production, but people loved it. No one said like, "Oh, this feels like you didn't put as much work into it as your normal episodes." Like,
Yeah,
so
no, we
I
don't.
guess I say all that to say like so much of it is expectations on ourselves. We're
Yes.
being hard on ourselves, thinking, "Oh, we got people are going to be annoyed if we like this shot looks lazy or something." No
Yeah.
one
Or we
notices.
reuse B-roll shots.
It's yeah. So sometimes you have to like remind yourself like these things that you're nitpicking, only you're the only one that sees it.
Yeah.
You
Mhm.
sometimes just gotta let it go and be willing to say like, what was it our friend Duke said one time, uh done is better than good.
Yeah. Or better than perfect. But, I
Yeah.
mean, you also need to think about that in the grand scheme of things, in today's society, YouTube videos are, like, the most disposable form of entertainment. People, like,
Yeah.
watch a lot of it, but, I mean, I bet you most of it, like, they forget about it immediately afterwards. It's something that I think that we struggle with, like, how much work do we put in, like, and continue to put in each time to make something that is gonna be, viewable and be perfect, like, in a year or whatever. So, I don't know. It's a whole other thing. I mean, there's, like, definitely there's a contingent of people out there that feel that anybody who does like, YouTube should, like, not make any money off of it. They miss, like,
That's
the
so
old days
wild to me. That's
of,
so
like,
wild.
pointing the
It should be a labor of love.
yeah, and you know what? Like, for the amount of time that we put into it, like, it's just not possible. It's like,
You
Right.
have lives
like
outside of this. Like, you have to, like,
exactly, like,
if
that's something I can
you
use to, like,
can't.
justify to my family, like, "Hey, like, I'm doing this, and here's, like, some extra money that we can do some stuff with now."
Exactly. I I'm always amazed when people like, don't get me wrong, I understand to a degree why people are worried about content creators getting paid, not necessarily because of them getting paid, but they're worried that their content's going to become all about the money at that point.
Mhm,
It's a weird symbiotic relationship where content creators do owe the audience everything because that's how they get their money, that's how they get their content. But at the same time, like as an audience member for a lot of stuff, obviously I watch your channel, I watch a lot of different YouTube channels. I'm not owed an explanation as to why they choose to make the content they choose to make, if that
mhm,
makes sense. Like
Mhm, absolutely.
yeah,
it's a very strange situation where it's like, yes, viewers and the audience deserves all the thanks in the world because they're the reason why you're here. No ifs,
mhm.
ands, or buts. And like I thank my audience all the time. But at the same time, like I don't know, it's a weird balancing act to walk.
Covering the subjects that they want you to cover versus the subjects that you wanna cover just for fun.
Exactly.
Right. And honestly, like we often feel very guilty about
Yes. Oh,
especially like
like,
long
like,
breaks,
right
like
now
long
is, like,
gaps
I
like we're in now.
yeah.
Yeah, we we feel kind of guilty. And then but then when we do our streams, which is like where, our some of the best of our community goes to, it's always like, hey, just take all the time you need, you don't need to worry about, like they're so supportive and appreciative of us even when there's not much to even at times when there's not much to show for our efforts.
Mhm.
Most of the time, like 99% of the people like are not being pushy in our community, and that's very appreciated, even though
Yeah.
we do still feel a bit of
Oh,
guilt.
yeah. I guess we're not, like, super publicly active, I think, outside of our streams.
Hmm.
I guess one thing that if we post anything on social media, it's kinda like, "Hey, look at this funny thing," or "Look at this neat thing," and then it's like, that's really it. I think over time, we have, stopped using our social media accounts. Like, we both
You've been
got
less active on social
yeah,
media.
just because we wanna just, like, do our stuff, and we wanna give people the episodes that they want, and also we just wanna, like, just have it be that.
I feel like social media adds a level of pressure to content creators because you have to constantly be engaged in some type of
Yeah.
conversation. You have to constantly be involved so that way people don't forget who you are, type of thing.
And
But
yeah,
like you guys
And
do
I'm
that
not good at
well with this.
multitasking, so I
No,
can't get
same.
video work done when I have those tabs open all the time.
right.
Well, like for me, that's why I enjoy Instagram a lot because it's a little bit
Mhm.
less quick pace. It's slower paced,
Right.
and people take time to set up shots and all this other stuff. And like I by me setting up a shot, I mean I have an empty shelf over there it's a black wall in the background, so it's like a really bland backdrop, and I take pictures of my game collection and I post it on Instagram. It's not really much effort involved into it, but even so, it takes a little bit more thought than just a tweet out. And
Right.
so I prefer that, but it's still, it's like one of the things, like Discord, I'm never active on Discord because it is just on Discord servers, even my own. I have one for the podcast and I never comment on it. I don't know what the hell to say. I don't have any comments to make.
We're fairly active in our Discord, but like
Yeah.
in other Discords, no, like not at all.
Yeah, I wish, like, I feel bad that like I just posted in last night in our mutual friend Game Dave's Discord
Yeah.
channel, because Live Alive or Live Alive or whatever you want to call it, the remake came out yesterday. And I thought, like, Dave is an
Live
RPG man, and I thought that chatting in the Game Dave Discord about Live Alive would be appropriate, but that's an exception. I very rarely, even though I wish I would sometimes talk more in like our friends and adjacent communities Discords, but no, I tend to mostly just talk one-on-one with people on Discord, and a few times a week I'll hold a conversation of some kind in our My Life in Gaming Discord. But I like that much more than what actual social media has become,
It's
because
exhausting.
it's much closer to just old AIM and forum discussions, right? Like
Yeah,
the ones that we
I think
enjoyed
forums
back when we were getting into the internet, right?
Forums are a lot more interesting, I think. And I have like a soft spot for forums. Like I grew up going to forums and going all the way back to like posting in like groups on Prodigy and AOL. Like, so I like forums a lot. Like and Discord is kind of a natural evolution of that. It's just more in real time.
Yeah.
But I mean,
kind of more of like a tight-knit community.
Yeah.
More so than, just this massive crowd.
Yeah. But I mean, like on Twitter, we will barely post anything, but I will use it as like a, the My Life in Gaming account follows like a pretty curated list of people. And like, that's just good for like information, like, oh, here's some news.
That's
but,
it.
it's
Yeah,
just, it's so exhausting just in general. Like, and I'd rather just spend time with my family.
No, dude, I'm with you. I'll get followed by, if you start a podcast and you have a podcast account for it, you get followed by so many different podcasts, but it'll be podcasts that have nothing to do with your community, and that's okay. Like I mean no disrespect to them, but I'm not going to follow them back. I have no interest in listening to your show, and not because it's not a comment on its quality. It's just I have enough on my plate as it is. I don't want to engage with something that I don't have an intention of engaging with. I don't like the whole follow for follow thing that a lot of people do. I can't stand that.
It's just a lot of stuff to like keep track of. And, like I just, as I've, like I have 2 kids and like a job outside of this, like it's just, I only have so much brain capacity to stay sane.
It's tough. And yeah, actually, I mean, you guys are active enough. You retweeted the episodes that I was with, that Try was on, so that's all that matters. That's all that matters to me. Actually, I think it was from you guys. Someone, when on the Final Fantasy Draft episode, someone from your community emailed me saying, "Hey, I heard your Final Fantasy Draft episode from Try and My Life in Gaming. Could you send me that Google Doc that you used with all the Final Fantasy draft rules?" I'm like, yeah, sure. So I sent them the link to the Google Doc that we used.
That's really fun.
So I thought that was really cool. Now I am starting to run out of time, so I have one more question about your channel, and then we're going to go into wrap up questions.
Right.
My last question about your channel specifically was, what was an unexpectedly difficult episode to make?
I mean, I think I know what Tribe will say here, but
That's TV.
well, that's one of many. Try seems to like have like the really hard ones like seem to pop up for him. I don't know why. Like it's just like
it's probably me overthinking it, and then all of a sudden, like it has to become complicated.
Well, things always get complicated when we want to do like an episode. When we're excited to do an episode on something and we find problems with it,
Yes.
Because, that's kind of the thing is like, we don't do videos on everything. And we generally go into everything that we do. It's like, we want this to be good because we want it to be something that we can use and enjoy. Like we barely ever go out of our way to like, I mean, we never go out of our way to say like, wanting something to be like, oh, this is gonna stink,
Yeah.
uh, we want everything to be good, and it's frustrating when things like
When
have
it's
some
not.
problems.
And
And
mostly it's because something like the OLED episode is different because LG is never going to listen to us, right?
Yeah.
We have no direct line to LG. The issues that I'm raising are never going to reach their ears, or at least not reach their ears in time. So I have no problem criticizing that. And it's not that I have a problem criticizing like retro tech made by like smaller community teams, but the fact of the matter is we have a direct line with them
yeah,
most of the time, and they will listen to our feedback. So it's frustrating when it's like, oh, this actually isn't working right, and I know they can fix it, but like I don't want to release the video trashing it
yeah,
when like it's going to be fixed within a week or something like that. So that
exactly.
was, Coury, I think, said, you think you'll know what I pick. You were thinking I was going to pick the GameCube
Right.
update video,
Yep.
right? Yeah, we did, our basic RGB GameCube episode a while back. We did a updates because there was then all of a sudden there was a lot of like plug and play solutions for getting good quality out of the GameCube.
Hmm.
And it turned out like, well, the component options were kind of still in development. The bigger issue was that, one of the HDMI options that had just come out, well, it also had like a dual component aspect, and it had a major problem with color reproduction where a lot of detail was lost. And I was just like, you cannot release this product in this state. Like it's not acceptable. And luckily they were able to get that resolved, but I believe it took kind of a lot of work uh,
Hmm.
to get the firmware fixed on that. And I was like, if this fix is what is going to be shipping to customers, I'm okay with that. But like, if it's not, then I am going to have to point that out. And I do like to point out in videos uh when the creator did go through the effort of fixing something. Like because I see that as a plus. Like
Yeah.
I want to give them credit when they listen. I want
Mhm.
to give them that credit. So it's not that I'm just going to like whitewash like the issue never happened. I will say like, hey, we saw this issue. We told them about it. They fixed it. Like to me, that actually should be a
Yeah.
feather in their cap,
Yeah.
even though,
Yeah.
yes, there was the problem. But yeah, that episode was really frustrating because, again, I thought like, oh, this is just going to work. It'll be great. And then there's all these problems. It's always frustrating when things don't work the way that they should.
Yeah.
I could see that. That actually, one more channel question that just popped
Mhm.
into my mind though. So, and then we'll go into the wrap ups now. So then, if you were to reboot your RGB 101 series, would you still use the FrameMeister as your jumping off point for the series, or would you choose now
Well,
that there's so much? I mean, that was 7 years ago now, right? So,
right.
so much has changed in the upscaling and the visual fidelity, retro visual fidelity community. What do you think? And you can be a quick answer if it jumps to your head. What would jump to your mind as being a jumping off point for people into to get into this community like you did with the FrameMeister?
Well, I mean, we sort of did something like that where we released a shorter video called RGB 100, which was kind of
Hmm.
like a became like a prequel to the like is kind of an introduction
But
to the entire series.
that's super outdated at this point as well.
And
I mean, that
that
was
is,
still
I
very
mean,
FrameMeister heavy.
like it wouldn't have been the Framemeister. It would have just been like probably just like RGB and like other video signals as like one big thing. But the
Hmm.
problem is that this stuff is always going to be outdated. The RGB 100 stuff, a lot of the information in there is stuff that doesn't really need to be updated. I think it's more of like a broader.
It's
Uh,
about signal, the
It's
signal
understanding the
quality
basics
and
of all
stuff
the
like
video
that.
Maybe not
signals. Yeah.
102, but I mean 102 was like it's kind of an anomaly looking at that because we didn't
Yeah,
really
it's a
know how to
weird
follow.
video.
And it is what it is, though, like, even when we started this, like, even with the second video, we had no expectations of having, like, college level numbering for everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And, like, I look at that now and I'm like, it's, like, a really good layout for it, but it's almost kinda pretentious at the same
Yeah.
time. I don't think
Hmm.
it, like, like mean for it to be like that. It just makes it easy to break down subjects.
Oh, I didn't
And
take it as a
but-
pretentious thing when I saw the 101 thing. I liked that. I liked it as a way. It very much felt like, okay, so I start with 101 and then I move on to 102. It feels
Right.
like college. And then I liked how the 200 and the 300 series was all something like much more. It was much more granular and much more specific. And I really liked that. But I was just more or less curious. Like, I understand you wouldn't remake it because that would be a lot of work for something that's going to get outdated again in like 2 years. But I was more or less thinking like, what would be your starting off point now if you were to make it today?
we would start with the RetroTink 5X without
Well, I don't even think it would be that. It'd just probably be like the different signals, what they are. And,
well, yes, we would do that. But in terms of like what we would recommend for upscaling, I think, we will be talking about the OSSC, the RetroTink 2X series, and the RetroTink 5X, and anything that comes out, because the FrameMeister is out of production. People sell it for a lot of money, even though it's not as good as what you can
As
get
what's
now. Like
available now,
the reason, the OSSC is still fantastic, and the RetroTink 2X series can still be very good, depending on your needs. But the 5X, what sets it apart from the OSSC is the motion adaptive deinterlacing for stuff like PS2 especially. So that is what I recommend. But also, I think something else to consider if we were to like reboot the series, it might not be entirely original hardware centric as it was, because at that time, retro game hardware and software prices have been going up so much in recent years. And for people who are starting out, it's like we're lucky to have had our hardware for a long time, to have been buying and collecting these games for a long time. That's why we have these collections, because it's been over many years and often before they were so expensive.
And when they came out, I mean, like
I feel like something like the Mister would actually be kind of more at the center of the series, and we would talk about, we could talk about upscaling the Mister through, say, the RetroTink or whatever, but it also has like a scaler of its own. So even though like something like the Mister is it is doing a hardware emulation of the games, it's not original hardware, and it has its own built-in HDMI output. I think there might be a larger focus on not just like signal quality and not just original hardware, but just kind of more of a conversation about upscaling in general, because that applies both to analog and digital. Right?
It's just it's so hard to put subjects into like a box, I guess, at this point. And we only do because like that's the like what we've set up for ourselves. Like that's the situation we put ourselves into. So I mean, like even our Mr. episode is not like, it's not an RGB series episode. It's just
it's its own
even
thing.
if that was like at the center of it, like I feel that people would check out immediately if they saw that as like a main video for that series. It's like, oh my god, it's 3 hours long. This is like way too much for me to handle.
Yeah. All right, let's start wrapping this up now. This has been amazing, guys. Thank you so much. We're approaching on actually probably an hour and 30ish, because we were talking for a bit while the mic was recording. So we're approaching an hour and a half ish, hour 40ish. So I wanted to wrap up this this kind of interview style episode with two questions. One, to harken back to when I was referencing the Clear and Vivid podcast with Alan Alda, he ends all of his episodes with 7 quick questions that invite 7 quick answers. I'm not going to ask all 7 questions. I'm going to pick one question that I really like from his, and then I'm going to do the question from Courtney, which, as the listeners know, my wife knows nothing about the gaming world, and she always likes to ask some bizarre, strange question. So we're going to end the episode with these 2 questions. We're going to start off with Alan Alda's, though. So one of his questions that he asks, and just whatever comes to your mind first, what do you wish you really understood?
Oof. Ha.
Other people. I mean, like, I mean,
it can be anything.
I don't know. Like,
I've got an answer. I wish I understood audio. That would make audio editing a lot easier. You know, I've relied on people much smarter than me to make audio presets for like voice and stuff like that, because I cannot do equalization to save
Mm-hmm.
my life.
Oh, neither can
Audio
I,
is kind of
and
like the
I'm a podcaster.
yeah, audio is kind of the necessary evil of video editing, that I've learned to fake it, but I don't really understand it.
All right, Corey,
Yeah,
did
I
you
mean,
were you able to think of anything?
I mean, I think that's definitely a good answer. I mean, like, I wish that I
Doesn't have to be production or video
right,
game
right.
related. Like for me,
I wish I
one
knew how
thing
to play music. I wish that I could
there you
like
go.
understood like, making music or like
I'm yeah. For me, it's music theory. I wish I understood music theory. I
Yeah.
love listening to people talk about, like they play this and they go up a fifth, and I'm like, I
Mhm.
don't know what that means, but that sounds really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's like
I've
a
always
whole
thought music composition would be really fun, but I just have no musical aptitude. I even have a hard time determining like if if you were to just play two notes and you were to ask me which one's higher, which one's lower, and which are they the same, I'd have to like really pause and think about it. Like I'm just really bad at music stuff, but it would be so fun if I had the talent to compose, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I have like a lot of stuff that I would wish I had time to learn. And like I wish that I had gotten a head start on a lot of stuff.
It's
I
fair
got,
enough.
I think about that a lot. Like I wish I had just, pursued at least like a little bit any of the interests that I had. I mean, like we talk about like if we had started this channel before before we did, where would we where would we be
We'd
now?
probably have a lot of money,
Yeah.
but we don't. Like before YouTube got, super saturated with people talking about video games.
Yeah.
I mean, you got in at a pretty good time at the very
We did.
least, just because,
And
like, it seems like there's two generations of gaming
mm,
YouTubers. You kind of have like the retroware days, which is like 2008 to like 2014, 2015. And then there's like some people who started out then and are still going strong now. You guys, I think the completionist started back in the
mhm,
early 2010s. He wasn't part of retroware, but I'm just thinking like
right.
that era of like gaming YouTube. And now, like the biggest gaming YouTuber you could maybe argue is like Scott the Woz or someone like that.
Right.
But all right, let's go to this last question. For questions from Courtney, I got to find a theme song for this. Da 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 da. Questions from Courtney. What is your favorite Tupperware container?
Probably the one that is like stained with different colors of sauce and has been gone through the dishwasher so many times that looks dirty, but it's definitely clean. I
uh,
have so many Tupperware containers in this house.
You
It's
have kids, you
ridiculous.
have to.
Yeah.
it used to be this tall one with a screw-on lid that like I would put like crackers and stuff in, but the other day a frog got inside as I was getting my after it'd been raining and I was getting my dog back inside, and I saw like a tiny frog like hopped
Oh my
through
god.
like the gap in the door into my bedroom. There was like two peanut butter crackers left in this container, so I like took them out, got the frog to go inside the container, and I got it outside. And I'm not sure if I want to use this container for food anymore. I mean, not that it couldn't be cleaned, but it's like the association of like there was a frog in this. So that used to be my favorite Tupperware container, but
Yeah.
I'm not. But its fate is to be determined at this
Yeah.
point.
What is it? Yeah, like my favorite Tupperware are BPA free Tupperware. Isn't that like
Yes.
the
Isn't that because that has like the BPA for you, because BPA is like the bad chemicals or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Um,
any Tupperware that doesn't have is BPA free is my favorite.
who would have thought we would be ending this episode talking about Tupperware?
I did
Yeah.
not.
I know you guys did not, and I'm sure the audience did not. So
I think that's a
let's
lot of fun.
I like the questions from Courtney, man. She had a couple other ones, but I liked that one the most, so we went with that one. Let's wrap this up. Where can Coury Try? First off, thank you so much for joining me. This was one of the most fun conversations I've had on the show in a long while, and just of all time. This was a lot of fun. So, where can everybody find you online? I don't know who wants to promote the socials for you guys, but
Sure.
where can
Well,
everyone find you? And is there any projects you'd like to promote?
I mean, we kind of like Corey said, we don't really use our own social much anymore. So it's all the shared stuff. It's just, youtube.com/mylifeingaming, twitter.com/mylifeingaming, and
It's at My Life in Gaming. But although we do
well,
have
yeah.
we have an Instagram account that I post to every once in a while. I did make a TikTok account that has nothing on it. It actually says like, My Life in Gaming on TikTok, lower your expectations. It has nothing on there. And like I joke around, I was like, oh, I'm gonna let my daughter run that. And I mean that exists, but there's nothing on it. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you can find us like YouTube and Twitter the most. And that's it. I mean,
all right. Well, as usual for me, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to email me, you can email me stillloadingcontact@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can give it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because that helps other people find the show and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. And I like feeling warm and fuzzy. If you want to support the show monetarily, you can go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For just $1 a month, you'll get the episodes a few days earlier at a higher bit rate, as well as access to a patron exclusive Discord, which you heard a little bit on this episode. I plan on doing a patron bonus episode on the play by mail games. So patreon.com/stillloadingpod. Those bonus episodes, access to the patron exclusive Discord, episodes a few days early, all that stuff is at the $5 level. And then for $1, you get access to episodes a few days early and the patron exclusive Discord. So the last thing I have to shout out, of course, is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that is all I have for you today. This was a super fun episode. Try and Corey, thank you once again for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a ton of fun.
And that's all we have for you today. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time.